Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first of our community book discussions for our 2022 selection, I Feel To Believe by Jarvis DeBerry. For those of you tuning in for the first time to a One Book One New Orleans event, I'll just tell you a little bit about what One Book One New Orleans is. One Book One New Orleans is an initiative for community literacy and reading. We choose one book every year and we bring everyone together through the experience of reading the same book at the same time. But when we do that, we have to recognize that many in our community struggle to access the book that we've chosen. So we do an extra layer of outreach to really make sure that when we say we're One Book One New Orleans, we mean it. We develop a curriculum around the book, and we get the curriculum and the book free of charge into adult education programs. That's adults reading at a second grade level all the way up to adults preparing to take their high school equivalency tests. We get the book into adult ESL programs, education programs in both adult and juvenile prisons, and the ears of the blind and print handicap through a partnership with WRBH Reading Radio. We also make sure that every branch of the New Orleans Public Library has a copy of the book, so that if you are an avid reader but you can't really afford to go buy your own books, then you can get the book for free. We have a series of free family-friendly community events. When they're in person, they're in a different neighborhood each calendar year. We don't repeat the same neighborhood twice in a year, so if transportation is your barrier, we're trying to eliminate that. Family friendly, because sometimes childcare is a barrier. Bring your kids. We love to see them. And when our events are online, they are on either Zoom or YouTube or Facebook or some platform where you don't have to pay money to access that at all. So access is the name of the game, and we are so excited to see all of you here tonight. Special welcome to the author of our 2022 selection, I Feel To Believe, Jarvis DeBerry. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, Megan, thank you.
And special welcome to A.E. Rooks. Among other things, Rooks is our facilitator for the evening. Rooks is author of The Black Joke. It's a new book. I'm going to get the subtitle wrong because I don't have it in front of me and it's very long, but let's see how well I do. The Black Joke, one ship's battle against the slave trade?
So close. The true story of one ship's battle against the slave trade, because they felt I needed to include the true part.
So close. Yes, definitely not the fiction. And it's an incredible book. We're going to be doing something for it very soon at Whiskey and Six, so stay tuned. I'm going to turn it over to Rooks to talk about I Feel To Believe. Welcome, Rooks.
Hello, everybody. So hopefully we get the discussion a poppin'. I already have mine with bookmarks. I've got like little flips at the bottom. I've got little ones at the top. I'm very, very excited. And so part of the reason that I will just say that I was excited in particular about this book, besides the fact that I voted for it, because I did, is because it's a really interesting way to get a snapshot, if you will. And instead of a snapshot at one moment, almost a time lapse snapshot, right? Like sort of 20-ish years of things that have been happening in the city around particular issues and around certain themes that seem to pop up again and again and again. And one thing I was struck by reading some of these columns for, the second or third time, but some for the first, was how much the sort of questions of what we lose when we lose our sort of elders, what we lose when we lose our culture bearers, what we lose when we lose our sense of place, and how relatable that is in many ways to what people are going through with the pandemic right now. In a way that it's like maybe New Orleans has even more to teach the world than we think we do, which is plenty. And so I got some really great jumping off points for thinking about this discussion this month. And rather than do PowerPoints, because that just seems so formal unless it becomes necessary, I'm just going to use my PowerPoint for my notes. And so sort of the three main themes that I sort of picked up from discussion and from what I read in many ways are Black neighborhoods and their importance to New Orleans culture, honoring the past and or preserving, documenting, and recognizing Black history and culture in New Orleans, and constantly implied throughout the future of Black people, their culture and communities within the context of this city, I think is one of those things that's constantly happening. So I'll just start with Black neighborhoods because I feel like they sort of build on their own scaffolding and trajectory. The 6 articles in particular that I'm looking at, sorry for all the it's a moment, were, let me make sure I have them listed just so everybody is on the same page. Once You Fall, You'll Never Be the Same, which is on page 44. For Black Homeowners, A Hollow Victory on 115. Remembering and Releasing the Pain of Slavery on 176. New Orleans Slave Trade Exhibit Displays the Pain of Being Purchased While Human, 188. You Can't Go Home Again, 204. And why doesn't Louisiana have a civil rights museum, 257. And there's all those little marks are other ones that apply to all of these things in some way, but those are, see, same thing. But so those are the columns that I was really looking to, and I hope that people sort of have stuff to bring to it. So what do you think? What was your impression over the course of reading this book or those columns in particular of the situation for Black neighborhoods in New Orleans right now? Or Black culture? I heard something. It was there. If you're speaking, I cannot hear you, but you are unmiked. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. And on the off chance we get the sound issue figured out. But so does anyone else have something that really leapt out to them about sort of the Black neighborhood, Black culture situation in New Orleans as things stand now? Obviously, the author is a great place to start.
Well, I will start. Thank you, Rooks. It's really a pleasure to meet you and to have this conversation. I have a vantage point, unlike a lot of people in New Orleans, is in that I lived all over the city and metro. When I arrived in New Orleans as an intern at the Times-Picayune, I had an apartment off Crowder Boulevard in New Orleans East, so across the high rise. And then I moved to Kenner, where I spent, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 months. And then I moved to Covington, where I lived for about a year or so. Then I moved to Treme. Then I moved to Gentilly, which is where I was when Katrina hit. Then I moved to Algiers Point, where I stayed because New Orleans was flooded on the other side. Then from there went to Riverbend. From there went to Broadmoor. So I have been kind of across the New Orleans, tightly into New Orleans, with the exception of the time I lived in St. Tammany Parish. And so obviously there's a dramatic difference between pre-flood New Orleans and post-flood New Orleans. But you could see it even, I would say, the last 6 or 7 years, like a further acceleration of, wait, this neighborhood used to look like this, and this neighborhood doesn't look like that anymore. And so it's a real loss. And there's so many anecdotes of people in the neighborhoods who get, of all the things they could be upset about, the common thread that I hear from people is, my neighbors don't speak, which is like the greatest offense to a New Orleanian thing, is to have someone on your block who doesn't wave, doesn't speak, doesn't acknowledge your presence. And I don't know that people who move into the city even have the concept of their neighbors being like their security, like watching your house, letting you know somebody knocked on your door. All of those things come from the neighborliness that New Orleanians expected. And the thing I hear people mourning perhaps more than anything, is that sense of neighbor, that sense of neighborhood, that sense that, hey, these new folks came in, they don't even speak to me in the morning.
Has anybody else felt that? I definitely have. I will freely own that I left when we had some inclement weather, as it were, and was gone for a hot minute doing various grad schools, and only made it back maybe like 2012, 2013. And even in sort of that span of years, things seemed far more changed than even they had just visiting in the interim time, even just right after Katrina. It suddenly seemed like 2015, 2016, 2017, things were just shifting in a real way. So I want to know, does anybody else like resonate with that experience? I will stop asking random questions. It's okay. Okay, I'll take the silence as a moment.
I'll chime in and say, I don't know if I necessarily had that experience because we bought our first home in 2016. But what I will say is one of the reasons we bought in the neighborhood we did is because the neighbors do speak. As soon as we pulled up, even looking at the house, we had 3 different groups of people coming up. Are you going to buy it? Oh, we're so glad there are kids here. And so it was that kind of neighborhood that you want your kids to grow up knowing that someone's going to bring the trash up to the porch if you're not there to bring in your trash that day. And, you know, they're going to bring in your mail. They're going to make sure your packages aren't taken from your doorstep. That was the reason we picked the neighborhood. And so the fact that it's vanishing, but yet it's the exact thing that you want to have and you want to raise your children in, I think is really telling. Also, it was really interesting, Jarvis, I'll follow up my other office assistants in here. And when you said all the different places you live just now, he was like, he's a nomad.
I'm glad he knows that word.
But this book is so rooted. Like, I would have never guessed you lived all those different places. So you just mapped it out because this book feels like you lived in the same house or 2, like the entire time you've been here.
Well, so
much
much of it,
get that?
yeah. Well, so much of it was just dependent on work. So, you know, I got here as an intern and there's no expectation that that's going to be permanent, right? So I came here as an intern. I had a friend in St. Louis at WashU who grew up in New Orleans. His mother was moving out of a place in the East. And so that's where I lived first. And then it's like, oh, I got hired and they want me to work in River Parishes Bureau, which is in Laplace. But, oh, we usually have a residency requirement, but we're not sure how long you're going to be here. So you can live in Kenner if you want to. Well, okay. And then it was like, oh, well, there's this new position in Tammany. We want you to take that. And then soon after that, I got hired on the editorial page and I didn't want to be in Tammany. And so I moved to Treme, and it seemed like, I mean, I couldn't have picked a better neighborhood, really, especially at that time. This is 1999. And so, you know, all of the things that people love about Treme still exist then. And yet I couldn't afford to buy a house there, right? And so it's like, oh, well, if I want to buy a house, I can't live in this historic neighborhood. So I moved to a place where I can afford, which is Chantilly. Then Hurricane Katrina hit, so I had to move again. Ended up on the West Bank because, again, all this site had flooded. Then a friend of a friend basically needed somebody to live in their house in Riverbend. The rent was going to be a lot cheaper. Then I got married, and Kelly and I bought a house. So that's kind of how we moved around those places. But there was a commonality to all of those neighborhoods, right? I mean, it's not like the people speak less on the West Bank or speak less in the East. You know, there is a general expectation that if you are in a New Orleans neighborhood, that you are a part of the fabric of that neighborhood. And so New Orleans and New Orleanians don't really let you be a stranger. At least they don't want to let you be a stranger. And that comes with all sorts of what people in other places might call intrusions, or that person is just being nosy, or they're all in my business. Well, yeah, that's going to come with it, but there was also the offers of gumbo and the offers of, getting invited to the crawfish boil or whatever the case may be. So I think most people who live here long enough realize that if they're just open, then they will be welcomed as a part of somebody's family or at least their circle of friends.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's experienced the vibe of potentially moving from one neighborhood to another and feeling like you've lost like 90% of the people you know. and you almost have to start fresh as if you moved to a city when you didn't. You moved 2 miles. It's not far in anything but mental distance, But I live in the Channel. I had a friend who moved here and I said, you're not going to get down to the French Quarter like you used to. And she's like, what do you mean? Sure enough. Because
when I left Algiers Point, I should say I used to go to this cafe and I told the owner, I'm moving across the river. Oh, well, we'll never see you again. And I said, I'm just moving across the river. Well, my daughter moved across the river and she might as well be in San Francisco. So there was like this anger, right, of people just leaving the neighborhood. And it seems sometimes as a kind of betrayal, like, what do you mean you're leaving the Irish Channel? What do you mean you're leaving the Lower Nine? Like this is who you are, not just where you are, but even who you are. I think some people like absorb that kind of identity, that strong like neighborhood identity.
I think so. I mean, we've got people shouting out their neighborhoods in like the chat, which is awesome, by the way, but I do like there's a vibe almost in the same way. Okay, this is going to be a terrible analogy, but it will work. But almost in the same way that people describe different alcohols as having different kinds of buzzes, right? Like tequila act one kind of way and gin makes you act another kind of way. And whiskey, you don't even want to know me at that point, like whatever it is, right? And I feel like people have a similar, there's a vibe that there seems to be something ineffable and indescribable and particular, about these places and their specific histories, even within the sort of unified umbrella history of New Orleans, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, to use the obvious example, your day-to-day life in Treme is not like your day-to-day life in Gentilly, right? Like the people in Gentilly would be a little more upset to see people walking down the street with horns and drums and, with a beer in their hand, right? In Treme, that's just another day, right? Like this is what you are going to expect to see. You will see it in the morning, you will see it at noontime, you will see it at night. It's just what you expect to see. And so there's that really obvious example that when I am here, this is how I dance, this is how I behave, this is how loud I can play my music without somebody deciding that the authorities need to be called in. There are some places where that is considered an offense, and then some place that's considered like the height of neighborhoodness. Like, thank you for letting me hear your music too. So I agree with you that there are different expectations about how you move in the world as a New Orleanian, depending on the neighborhood actually that you're in. I hadn't thought of it quite that way, but I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Well, I think, hey, y'all can't see me. I might log out and jump back in. My camera's, got to reset. But I grew up on the back of town side of Treme, and I bought a house in Gentilly. So, I mean, to that point, at home, previous home, you'd be out at night talking to neighbors on the street. It's 12, 1 o'clock. Folks were on the street. They're on the bikes, whatever was going on. I moved to Gentilly. It was so quiet. I was like, this is scarier. It's scary to be here because there's no activity on the street. So,
nobody looking out for you.
Activity on the street would be scary. I thought that was a little too quiet, for that. I mean, obviously, I've gotten used to it. I've been here for a minute. But I'll also say about saying hello, yeah, absolutely, and good evening, good morning, those kinds of things. I think it also, we had a lot of new people who came to New Orleans. We welcome everybody, right? But after Katrina, we moved to Texas for a while. My brother was up there. And, when we're just walking around the neighborhood trying to get a walk in or do whatever. And we're just even saying hello to the people who are doing lawns, and not necessarily the homeowners. Say good morning, good evening. Either they wouldn't look back at you to acknowledge, or it was like, why are you talking to me?
Yeah.
So I think some of it is just this, maybe it's unique, I don't know, about New Orleans, that people just acknowledge presence, on the street. And whether it's a nod, whether it's a good evening, how you doing, whatever that is, that doesn't happen in a lot of other places. So if you're not from here and you've moved here, maybe that maybe explains some of it. I'm not, giving folks a one way or another, pass or not pass, but I don't know, maybe that explains some of it.
Yeah. I mean, part of that goes to something that this appeared in a couple of other columns in the book, but this sort of question of where does like race and culture and sort of New Orleanian identity, which is obviously a Venn diagram, but not a completely, overlapping circle.
Yeah.
Where does that play in, right? Because when people talk about, talking to each other on the street, like the first thing that comes into my head is the nod. And the nod, for people who are not familiar with the nod, is if you see another Black person on the street, you give them the nod. I see you, I recognize you, you are here, I see your presence, right? Whatever can be added to the nod. And that is something that, though I would never say is common in other cities, I would say it's common amongst Black populations in many other cities.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, okay, well, so we all know the t-shirt / art / moment with everything you love about New Orleans is because of Black people, right? So when we think about these things that we love about New Orleans, this acknowledgement, this greeting, and these neighborhoods, how much of that identity and how much of that difference is due to Black people?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And I think it's not just in the acknowledgement, it's often the way the acknowledgement is voiced. You become somebody's baby like instantly when you move into New Orleans. It's, hey, my baby, or how you doing, baby? Like that, you don't really get that in a whole lot of other cities in this country, where there is, yes, they're being over familiar, but it's an over familiarity that's so common, it doesn't feel like anybody is being overly familiar, right? It's like, this is the way that we speak. This is the way that we talk. The fact that people you might barely know might hug you and kiss you on the cheek. It's New Orleans really compels you, like I said, again, to open up and to be open to others, and to be affectionate to others, not in the sexual way, but just to express some measure of goodwill, some sweetness, some type of nice thing that you can say to somebody else, regardless of how well you know them. It's just what you do and how you address them.
For sure. I saw a hand. Was that Christian?
Hi, yeah, I wanted to jump in before because I moved here 2.5 years ago from Austria for school, and it was just really interesting for me to experience the differences, as Jarvis just said. With I'm in the checkout lane, somebody says, "Oh, baby, you're fine," or "Take your time," as things like that. Just because my part of Austria is known for being very unwelcoming to strangers, so this was really nice. And at the same time, it's funny because the little town that I grew up in Austria, with around 8,000 people, that had I knew everyone in my neighborhood. Basically, I said hello to people and so on. And when I moved to the slightly bigger still city or town for you Americans, I guess, people didn't do that. So you don't say hello to people on the street. You just mind your business. You go about your day. And then coming to New Orleans, it was funny because even though it's a different continent, a completely different place, in a lot of ways, it reminded me of being home in my hometown. Because if I go for a walk, I live in mid-city, know a lot of people, at least down my street by name, or just knowing them, going on walks too. And I say hello, and it just feels nice to have that sense of community in a way.
And Christian, I take it New Orleans is the largest of those places that you've lived, right?
By far, yeah.
And yet the familiarity is closer to the smallest places
Exactly.
you lived.
And
Yeah.
I think it links back to what you all said before about the neighborhoods sort of being very, very special places as well. Because I lived up near UNO campus, where I work, and it was a little different there because it's also more collegey, and a lot of that neighborhood was people from abroad. So it felt less like the New Orleans that I experience now in Mid-City in a way. So it's just been nice to have that more hometown feel in my neighborhood now.
Well, welcome, Christian.
Thank you.
I hope you're having a good time here.
I'm having a very good time. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and say, even when I first moved here, I didn't know anyone here. I moved here for a job, and I remember going downtown New Orleans, just sightseeing, and people were talking to me, and they were holding entire conversations. And I wasn't sure. I'm like, are they just talking out loud? Or are they talking to me? Because they're carrying on a whole conversation. So finally I said, do I know you? And they're like, no, baby. And I was like, oh, okay. So you are talking to me. And they're like, yeah. And I was like, I think I'm home. I think this is it, because like I said, I moved around a lot by myself, always had to, learn new people, meet new people. And all of a sudden here, it was just, we know you. You don't have to learn us. We don't have to learn you. We're going to sit here. We're going to talk. And they're like, follow me. We're going here. And I was like, I don't know if I should be following this person, but I feel safe. So, I mean, I wouldn't do it now, but I'm like, then I was like, okay, let's go. I'm home. They know me. They know my energy. I don't know if they pick up, it's an energy thing. I think a lot here where they pick up, if you have a good vibe about you, but it was amazing. So yeah, I love it here.
My wife has a story when we were in Riverbend about meeting, the Curves used to be there, the gym for women. And she would go and she met this older woman there, and Miss Foxy is her name. And so Kelly is telling me this story. Miss Foxy said that she had been at the gym long enough that now she could raise her arm above her head. And I said, well, what happened that she wasn't able to raise her arm above her head before? And my wife says, well, I didn't want to ask her. I said, she was wanting you to ask her. that was the whole point of that conversation. And so you don't have to bring that kind of restraint that you might have in other places here. People are sharers, and they want to engage you in conversation. And as I figured, in fairly short order, we were being invited over to eat and to spend holidays with them, and, putting our feet under her table. So, it was an outreach of sorts to let us know that we were welcome. And yes, I am talking to you. I am engaging you in conversation, even though we are, two strangers like passing each other on the sidewalk.
It's the familiarity born of community is what I think a lot of people are getting at and saying in a variety of ways, right? Like there's such a strong sense of community here that the familiarity part is like, well, you're here, so are you not in this community? And then, the conversation proceeds from there, and so it sort of goes to that thing where I think people like to, what Christian had said earlier with, this is it's like the biggest little small town you'll ever be in. Like when I have friends come or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'm thinking about moving here. I'm like, cute. Like, what's your advice? Don't talk about anybody at a voice louder than, unless you literally know everybody in that room. And I do mean everybody, because you never know.
Yeah.
2 degrees of separation, 2.
Exactly. Who knows who?
I'd say one.
Might be one.
I say one. I mean, I've known of a certain friend of mine for probably 5 years. And the last conversation we had, she mentioned who her uncle was. And I said, wow, I didn't know that was your uncle, like some person of great note in the city. And it's like, I had no idea. And this was after I had just recently discovered she was related to somebody else that I knew. And so yeah, it's I don't think there's a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees of separation in New Orleans. Usually you can like get one person away, very, very quickly.
Absolutely. I literally walked into Peach's record store and one of the owners behind the counter was like, I know your people. And I'm like, excuse like, I don't know my people in Louisiana. I have tons of them. It is a fact, but I don't know them. Like I lived all over the country. And she's like, no, come to the 7th Ward. They live on XYZ Street. You look just like, what are the last names in your family history? Oh, it's them, and and it was a whole situation. And she was like, no, please, like, come to my neighborhood. That's where your people live. Even if you don't know that they're your people, I know they're your people because we're in this community.
And I can look at you.
I see them all over your face,
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, great. So, there's some mystery relatives out there to meet, but that seems like such a quintessentially sort of New Orleanian thing to have happen to one. And speaking of quintessentially, so I don't want to move on unless we're still, but I feel like we're at a good transition point. Okay. But another quintessentially New Orleanian thing, which this has all reminded me of one time I was at I will not say which restaurant actually, because they could get in trouble, I guess, but I was at a fancy restaurant in a certain neighborhood popular with tourists. And we all know which neighborhood. So, but so I'm there, and this is right after the smoking in restaurants ban had passed, and I want to say 2008 maybe. And I'm waiting for some folks and whatnot to go in, standing in front, and a woman comes out in sort of the maitre d' whites and blacks, and she's like, honey, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, ma'am, the smoking ban just passed, so I was smoking. And she's like, oh, them Yankees up in Baton Rouge trying to tell us what to do. You just come on inside, honey. And I'm like, ma'am, it is 45 minutes to the north. But like the vibe was that is so not New Orleans. Like that, to tell people that they can or can't do this, or to not let a business decide. When obviously this is a public health question, so it's different. But the attitude was that is so not New Orleans that we don't even claim them. Not even we don't even claim them as Southerners. They're dead to us, And so when it comes to people from outside New Orleans in particular, trying to change a lot of these neighborhoods, and it might be legislatively, it might be ordinance wise, it might be people with a lot of noise complaints, like that came up earlier. If you move to anywhere near Frenchman Street, I say enjoy your noise complaint because you knew that was coming. But nonetheless, it is a thing, right? And it's a thing that we're constantly sort of dealing with and in conversation with about the neighborhoods where people do not wave. The example, there's a street in the Bywater where somebody posted a handmade sign that says this block has only 2 people on it or whatever. And they sort of have their rant about their neighborhood being empty, and it's a real thing. So how do folks react to that, I guess? Or does that bring up anything for anybody? Or was it just taking it on a bummer, man? You're having such a lovely conversation, then you had to bring tourists into it. Why?
Can you rephrase the question for me? I just want to make sure I understand what I'm trying to respond to, maybe.
Absolutely. And it's not like, it is not a hard, any nugget that you like of it, please feel free to run by any stretch of the imagination. But basically what I'm asking is we've been talking about what's so special about New Orleans and what's so special about us moving here and feeling welcome here in the case of being transplants, or, having this like really deep sense of identity, in the case of being lifelong neighborhood residents and whatnot. And so how do we negotiate preserving those feelings with also the need for investment, the need for the tourism dollars that sustain our economy?
Gotcha. Well, I'll say I absolutely agree with you for people who, I'm on the Nextdoor app, although I don't know why, because I don't know why. But I'm a masochist, and so I stay on it. And you read, you start reading these things, and I want to type things to people. And I am a former kind of city employee. And so I have to maintain a little bit of, stuff that I couldn't respond to things while I'm, what are you talking about? Is what I want to type many, many times. But for people, I mean, your perfect example is people who move to the French Quarter and then complain about the noise. It's like, what did you think this was going to be? I don't even understand why did you move there? You thought, I'm going to find the one house in the French Quarter that's going to be, a suburban, quiet.
Find Lakeview in the French Quarter, if only you believe. Yeah.
So I'm challenged with people like that, and you just want to go, get a grip or move. And then I will say people, and we're off topic, but I'm going to run with it. Our own New Orleanians who are on Nextdoor also, there are a lot of folks who are, this city is so, fill in the negative comment. And what I want to type to them is, why are you still here? And no place is perfect, and we certainly got a lot, and there's a lot going on. But the thing is this, the politicians are all corrupt. This is this, we pay too much taxes, and we did it. And first I'm like, you don't even know what taxes are. The taxes that people pay in New Orleans, that's nothing. I talked about the house that my brother had in Texas. The taxes in Texas are, 5 times what people, pay here. So when people, we pay these high taxes, I'm like, you don't even know what a tax is, But I find, let's find what's good about it. What brought you here, and embrace that piece. And I just think overall, I got my share of gray hairs from age. I've seen a lot, neighborhood changes, cultural changes, and societal changes where you knew more of your neighbors. Look, frankly, because there was a parent usually who was home while another parent was working, and, kids played in the street because we didn't have all the electronic things. And so you knew and engaged with more of your neighbors. And that's just a society change, I think. But I was going somewhere with that. And
We're not worried.
I think if for people who aren't natives, but found something that they love about New Orleans that compelled them to move here, what is the remembering of what it is that you loved about it that compelled you to move here? And how can you bring that spirit of what you love to wherever you are, and reach out? It doesn't, when I first moved to, again, Gentilly, the quiet zone, like this is where people are gonna be murdered and no one will know because it's so quiet, I had baked cookies and brought them to my neighbors because why not? So there's not, it doesn't have to be a big thing that you do, but it can be a small thing. Leave a note on your neighbor's door and say, hey, I'm your new neighbor. How are you doing?
Absolutely. I'm very much reminded of another one of the columns in the book wherein it was basically, I know people say meme, I say mem, I took French, whatever. But there's a mem that's like, this isn't an airport, no need to announce your departure. And there's a column where the entire vibe is, this is not an airport. If you want to go. You don't need to tell us, why.
Yeah, and what struck me about that moment in time, and you have probably seen, Rooks, that there's developed this entire genre of complaint in popular culture where I'm so fed up with this particular place that I'm living that I'm going to write for some name your pick internet publication and tell the public why I'm leaving. It's like, you don't have to do that. You can just you can just quietly absent yourself and we will go on about our business. But I think all of this gets to the fact that I think people in New Orleans very quickly learn that if you love this city, that loving the city means defending this city, right? And loving New Orleans means that at some point or another, you're going to find yourself in service in having to say, no, that's not right. And no, that's not why we flooded. And no, that's not what existed before. And as is it Miss Ellen just said, you don't have to be here. Nobody is holding a gun to your head. And these attitudes that every place else is better, well, why don't you go there? I mean, that's the general attitude that people have here. And I think people understand very well New Orleans' its imperfections and flaws. I mean, how could you not? Because you're living among them and you see them every day. You have to deal with the potholes and the crime and the poor schools. And so it's not people who are insisting that New Orleans is some perfect place. It's people insisting that she's worth improving, that she's worth defending, that she's worth the effort that goes into loving her. And I think that's what really offends people. If you're going to be here, then the least you can do is love this place and try to make it better.
I mean, I've often described New Orleans to people who are like, I don't know how I feel about it. I'm like, New Orleans is the best place in the world and the worst place in the world. And if you can't deal with that, New Orleans is not the place for you. But if that sounds intriguing, come on down. The water's
it will
not
break
fine.
it will break your heart. As most people, most things that we love will often do. You only have heartbreak when you love somebody or love something, right? And so loving New Orleans comes with the excessive amount sometimes of heartbreak, but there is still that love there that's really, you said ineffable earlier. I think it's ineffable in many ways. Like people really can't put their finger on it. This is what makes me love this place. But there is something about the whole gestalt of it all that says, look, this is a place I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. It's the way it all sort of comes together into a lot more than the sum of any of the parts that one even imagines. But some of those parts are really like crucial to how we experience this, right? The noise and the music, and then the noise violations. There are parts of this that people are, it seems like that there are groups and folks and whatnot trying to fight, to change, to homogenize, maybe is a good word for it, even beyond gentrify, in some ways where it's like, well, why can't I get this thing here that I can get in Denver or New York or Portland or wherever? And it's like, well, you can't, is the answer to your first question. So we have to deal with the rest of it, it can often be the vibe. And I think as a result, I think people think of New Orleanians as, and sort of Louisiana's generally, and this plays into stereotypes about the South, obviously, but people think of New Orleanians as sort of complacent, that folks are just sort of fine with this. And the reason that it's like this is because people haven't really done much about making it different, when nothing could be further, from the truth. And which sort of goes into the column, the piece about, yeah, that is a great quote. Megan just put in the chat for folks who aren't looking at it, that Jarvis writes, "We love that place with all the tenacity, defiance, and ferocity we can muster. Others might find our love of the place incomprehensible, but to us, nothing makes more sense." And I think that that's absolutely true. But so when we look to the question of, so how are we preserving this? How have we worked to change this? How have people in the past worked to get us to the place where we are? I can't help but keep going back to the why doesn't Louisiana have a civil rights museum question, especially as somebody who went to library school. So I'm like, can we talk about digital humanities? What do we need? You know what I mean? To at least get it started. And it just seemed like one of those things where even because one of the things that was discussed repeatedly in that article was that that there was this will to do it, right? This sort of mandate without a budget, that there was will, but there was nothing beyond this sort of, well, we voted for it, good enough, you know?
Yeah.
And it seems like one of those things that's repeated a lot. When it comes to dealing with issues in the city, but also when it comes to recognizing the people behind those efforts, right? It's not just the people in the Civil Rights Museum in Mississippi who are New Orleanians who aren't getting, but also the people in New Orleans who are trying to get this done, who in many ways aren't being recognized.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, and I hadn't thought about that column in quite the way you're raising it, which makes me glad we're having this conversation. But I do think it demonstrates that how often the movement from the people is thwarted by some official bureaucracy or branch of government somewhere. Trust me, it's not that the people on the ground in New Orleans don't want better schools. They've been begging for better schools. It's not that they want streets riddled with potholes. They do not want streets riddled with potholes. But just like the Civil Rights Museum example, you know, yes, this is something that the public has demanded, that people want, that the people who have seen the heroism of the civil rights workers and know what went into it want to see. And I think they want to see it built before a lot of the people who would be included in it pass on and pass away. Like, we need to have a museum while Jerome Smith is still here, right? And while Miss Doty is still here, and while we still have so many freedom writers left. And yet, you know, people are saying, well, we don't have the budget for it. And now you have this new craziness where, you know, everything that is tangential to even to Black history is considered critical race theory. And so, you know, I would say that there is even less chance right now than there was even 3 years ago when that column was written. But it does, I think, speak to how Louisiana, because New Orleans is in Louisiana, I think some people from afar may think that, you know, oh, it's so much better than Mississippi or Alabama or whatever southern state you may be thinking. But that's just New Orleans. You know, we have a critical mass of folks that makes Louisiana, that leavens the conservatism of Louisiana just so slightly, right? But it's still there, you know, and, you know, we're not better than, the state isn't better than Mississippi in any measurable way, you know, or Alabama, you know. But yeah, just this attitude that the people have often found opposition and resistance to what they're doing. But what I admire so much about Louisiana, and especially the civil rights workers, is these aren't people that just said, okay, well, you said no, I'm gonna stop. You know, like, the whole point that they're pushing is, you know, people who could not be stopped and would not be stopped. So, you know, I am so hopeful that I'm hearing that they're still trying to secure a site, that maybe one of the previous ones they wanted has opened up again. We'll see. I'm hopeful, you know, that's what people are talking about out there. So we'll see. I would hope that it happens soon, because Louisiana's history is so significant. I think in that column, I quote Ernest Jones. If I don't quote him saying this, I know he said it to me, that so many people say that Atlanta is the cradle of the civil rights movement, but the wood came from New Orleans, or something to that effect. You know, just how many people, Andrew Young among them, you know, were born in New Orleans. How many, you know, the newspapers, the Tribune started in New Orleans. You know, Plessy versus Ferguson is a civil rights protest in New Orleans, you know, 60 years just about before Rosa Parks and Montgomery. So you cannot leave out New Orleans when you're talking about the civil rights movement. But unfortunately, because Atlanta and Memphis have been so much better telling that part of their story, New Orleans just gets left out as if it didn't really have the role in that story that it actually had, which is sad. And we need to get our bleep together and actually get that done.
Definitely. Other people have like feelings, thoughts, moments, reactions?
Yes, a lot of thoughts and feelings. I couldn't get here fast enough. I was visiting the city for 14 years before I finally moved and was able to buy a home in 2017. And it felt like, for me, it was like paradise. Like, I've wanted this since I was a little girl. This is my dream come true. And it also felt like a real responsibility to uphold the nature of the culture that I had loved and admired all my life. And so, yeah, that does include things like saying hi to neighbors and like, oh my gosh, my neighbors, we are all up in each other's business. I was in Maine over the summer and, you know, my mom hears my partner and I talking on the phone and she was like, who is that? And I was like, oh, Mr. Tony. She was like, your neighbor? Is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, we're just checking in, you know, seeing what's up in the neighborhood, what's going on. Like, we would call him while we were away because, like, that's what we do. We got the group text in the neighborhood too, like just like you're talking about, people bringing each other's packages or run errands for each other, all sorts of stuff. So I think it does include that part of psychology of how we're interacting with one another. And it also includes policy, like how are we interacting with the system and showing up for the causes we champion, whether that's the sacred spaces that we demand must be preserved, like, you know, recently with the talk about moving City Hall to Armstrong Park, like that's not what Congo Square is for. And it was so powerful though to see everybody who showed up there. Like, I looked through that crowd and I saw musicians, elected officials, business owners, unhoused people, like anybody and everybody in the city. And I think that's a really powerful thing that we have going for us, is like there is solidarity in that resistance and showing up for the protests and the rallies and signing the petitions. And we actually do get to see the results too. You know, like that City Hall example with that proposal being withdrawn. Yeah. So in terms of that preservation, I think it takes us just continuing to show up with one another and then in the bigger system as well.
Yeah, I mean, I also like, one of the things that I really love about it is that New Orleans isn't particularly concerned with respectability, right? It's about doing what needs to be done in the context of needing to do it and enjoy, you know, and in some ways, obviously it is, but, you know, when it comes down to getting things done, like you were talking about, like showing up and showing out and whatnot in support of a cause, then it's about, well, did you get there? It's not about, you know, who do you know? And it's just like, we'll just get to the protest and then we'll figure it out, you know, or it's, oh, are they going to take down the okay, let's just have an entire party like right around there. Ooh, is there a 6-foot sinkhole in the middle of Canal Street? Sounds like sinkhole to you know, and so people get really into like, sure, it looks like a party, right? It just looks like people just got together and started drinking and playing some instruments wherever the heck it is. But I think that when we talk about, and one of the things that came up in the emails, like when we talk about the history that is traumatic and filled with loss and filled with erasure, it's also important to talk about ways in which that joy has been preserved and sustained sort of throughout that. And part of that, I think, is having your protests maybe also look like a street fair, you know, where it's like somebody might sell you ice cold water $1 if, you know, you get past a certain base number of attendees, you know. And I think that that seems to me, that seems great. And that also seems like how you keep encouraging people to not just want to show up, but know that this is something that you want to be present for, that you don't want to have your voice absent from, that you want to sort of stand up and be counted in this way, because it's like, well, also, you know, when in doubt, it'll be a good time. I think everybody's going that way. So let's all go protest together, you know? And that seems, I don't know, that seems really interesting to me, and something that's sort of crucial maybe for other places as well.
I think part of it too, that New Orleanians, and some people will see this as a negative, and I definitely don't mean it as such, but New Orleanians don't put their highest sense of purpose and priority into work or what your job is. And I think that leaves the rest of the country side-eyeing the city like a whole lot. Like, how could you not like prioritize being on time and this particular job that you have? One of the things that always lodged in my mind after I heard him say it, John Bignett, the writer, was on a, I think, PBS special, one of many following Katrina, and he talked about his grandfather. And he said that his grandfather referred to tourists as the Americans. So he would say, oh, every summer the Americans come to town, right? And so he had it in his mind. I think it's a very, very helpful frame to look at the city of New Orleans, that New Orleanians are not Americans. The New Orleanians are New Orleanians. And everybody else who comes in may be American in some sense. But that idea that this city operates on a different set of rules, like a week from today, New Orleanians would be doing what New Orleans does as the rest of America clocks in at 9, clocks out at 5, you know, make sure they are doing whatever corporate expectations they have that particular day. But to Liz's point about people participating in that, you know, I'm sure they were supposed to be at work, right? Or they had some expectation that they were supposed to be doing, but people have a tendency here to put their passions above their kind of corporate responsibilities. And you see it in those interactions that we just talked about. The fact that people, as Kalamu Yasalam once explained it to me, if people feel like they have to obey the clock, right? And they have to be on time and you have to rush from here and there, you don't have people calling you my baby on the sidewalk. You don't have people lingering over conversation, because they couldn't do that if they were, you know, prioritizing being at work at 9 o'clock on the dot, right? And so what New Orleanians are choosing above that is relationship. And what they're putting above that is those kind of pleasantries and affection that are considered so vital here. And so, yeah, I think if one is reading this book or coming to this book for the first time, I would hope that they would see, as Bignett's grandfather put it, you know, you have your Americans over here and you have your New Orleanians over here.
Yeah, I mean, my experience going abroad, and so I don't know if Christian has any particular insight on this, but my experience going abroad, the last time I was able to do so in 2019, I was in London, and they were like, oh, American, you know, was kind of the vibe. And I was like, look, you can just say it. And they're like, say what? You're afraid of Americans? In the immortal words of David Bowie, it's fine. Aren't we all? You know, like, but that, and then they were like, okay, well, where in the United States? Like maybe it's someplace I've heard of or something, you know, is kind of the idea. And it's like New Orleans. And then suddenly it's like, oh, well, I always wanted to go there. Like that place sounds so cool. I've seen stuff on the internet about New Orleans. Is it true you do the thing with the bees? You know, like whatever. And like, and it becomes a whole different conversation that is somehow distinct from how the states are conceptualized as a whole. Somehow New Orleans just gets to be its own sitch.
Yeah, that's a perfect illustration of that, I think, where, oh, well, you're different. You're not like those other cities in America.
That definitely happens in Paris and in France because of just the other connection, you know, to French culture in here.
Yeah, I bet.
I don't, Did you want to say something? I saw you come on, Christian, but I didn't see you actually say you were going to say anything.
Just,
So I don't
just
want to
because you said my name, and I mean, there is a special connection because my hometown of Innsbruck is there's a friendship treaty between New Orleans and Innsbruck, and similarly the University of New Orleans, where I work now, and the University of Innsbruck, where I worked before, have a friendship treaty, and there's a big student exchange in a big summer school. So there is sort of more awareness for New Orleans as a place in my particular part of Austria. And I guess in general in Austria, or in a lot of places in Europe as well, where it's, as you said, it's not just, oh, it's somewhere in the States, but it's a distinct place. I always love that I always forget who it's by, the quote that there's only 3 cities in America, and it's New York, Los Angeles, and New Orleans, and everything else is Cleveland. And it's sort of that sort of it rings true. And also when I first learned about the history of New Orleans, in many ways it does feel more European to me than a lot of other places in the US that I visited, just from having an old city center with the French Quarter to just in general the history of how people first arrived here and sort of all the changes the city went through, and also having a little bit of history I mean, a lot of history for
comparatively speaking.
That's one of my other favorite quotes, is that Americans think that 100 years is a long time, and Europeans think that 100 miles is a long distance. So while I've been here, I've definitely sort of brought those two kinds of thinking together.
And I think that actually goes back to Jarvis's point before. We're talking about the idea of the Americans are coming, right? I mean, in 1803 or whatever, the Americans were literally coming. And so you would have to have a different vibe, sort of, for lack of a better way of putting it, but sort of undergirding your sort of ethos as a place or as a city if it's literally based in a different country. And it's not like Britain and France in the 17th and 18th centuries were trying to be friends. So or the 19th century or this way, but it's fine. But so you do end up in a situation where you have the French history and you have the Spanish history, and then you have the American history, as opposed to places that were either were sort of colonized and then American immediately, right, in the context of Britain, or colonized and then American, as we sort of manifest destiny our way across like the continent, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah.
And I mean, again, like you said, it was already a huge city before it became America, right? And so that makes all the difference in the world. If you go out and capture a city and say, oh, well, this is your country now, it's not really going to be your country, not deep down, not at its roots. So yeah, I think that really defines New Orleans in a different way. But like I said, people, as someone in the chat put it, you're prioritizing those things that give you a higher quality of life, and not necessarily prioritizing those things that make you more likely to get a job promotion. And I think that's the kind of different set of values that people have in this city collectively. Of course, it's a generalization and a stereotype, but I do think that is a different way of living than most Americans are told that they're supposed to live.
Absolutely. I think one of our favorite bartenders at a bar that Megan and I share in common, which again, I will not say, but told us, Megan was not there, but she literally told me and my partner, she's like, oh, you guys don't need to come here. It's fine. Like, I don't really love these people. It's fine. And we were like, wait, what? Did you just tell us not to give you business? She's like, no, I'd rather see you out. I only work like, and we're like, oh, well, where else do you work? On the assumption that she works somewhere else. She's like, oh no, I just work here. And we're like, but you only work 2 nights a week. And she's like, yes. And so it's like, I have follow-ups and questions. And like, but her vibe was, she was like, look, I've been in my apartment for however many 20 years. So it's like the landlord and I been knowing each other and we're neighbors, and they ain't trying to raise my rent because, like, the mortgage is covered or whatever. I make enough to save for when I'm off in August, like every service person in the history of New Orleans, and like go off on like a little trip or something like that. And she's like, so I can pay my rent, I can buy my groceries, I can take a yearly vacation for a minute. Why work more than 2 nights a week?
Before Willie Mays became the big thing that it is now, and when it was still like largely unknown, the Times-Picayune's food critic, then SM Han, I think her name was, went to the proprietor, Miss Willie Mae Seaton, and wanted to do a story about her. And the condition was, you can write about this restaurant, you can write about how great it is, but you cannot put the name of the restaurant in the newspaper because, baby, I got enough business already. That is what she said. She did not want, she was not looking to expand. She wasn't trying to get bigger. She was perfectly fine with a house, like a double that had been converted into this restaurant, where she had the same 5, 6, 7 like core people that she would see, once or twice a week. It was a life, and it was a life that it led to her being a James Beard Award winner and all of that. But she said, baby, I don't need no more business. And she was clear on that. I'm not an Al Copeland here, right? I'm not trying to establish some type of franchise that's gonna take over the world. That I am perfectly fine with this. Mm-hmm. And that's a contentment that you don't really see in so many other places.
Absolutely. I see in the chat, Miss Ellen was saying that she grew up 2 blocks
from there. Well, and now interestingly, as in gentrifying the neighborhood, where we grew up, and I look at housing prices that are going, and I'm like, what they want, what for this house? How much is this house? And I drove by the restaurant the other day on my way passing from my mom's house, and not a person of color standing in the very long line, to get in the restaurant. And so, to your point of, she wasn't trying to expand, and they're still in that same spot. Correct. But are they serving the neighborhood? And I don't know who from the neighborhood is, patronizing the restaurant these days, because it looked like, and I'm not saying that the people who are not people of color didn't live in the neighborhood, but it seemed like there were I didn't see no Black people in line waiting to get in,
Well, when I took my family there to Willie Mays, this was before Katrina, I'm sure, I think there was like 1 other table occupied. And Miss Willie Mae had finally done all her work for the day, and she was sitting at the adjoining table, and she and my dad had this conversation because his mother, my grandmother, was named Willie Mae, and so they had this like a conversation about that. But yeah, it wasn't some big thing. This was like that tucked away restaurant in the neighborhood that you had to know about, to know where it was. It was almost like, you ought to check out this place, and that was it, and I'm not saying any of this to begrudge her heirs who have built the business up bigger. God bless them for doing that. But what I am saying is that it seemed to be enough for her, and that she did not have these grand ideas about, expansion and franchising and all of these things. The favorite memory of going to Willie Mays for the first time was seeing Slim. I think that's what everybody called him, her son. Now, she was like, he was an old man, so I was shocked to realize that he was her son, right? And we ordered lemonade. And we looked into the kitchen and he was squeezing a lemon into a glass to make the lemonade. It was like, oh my God, he is making each individual glass of lemonade by hand.
Not a
And it was
juicer
like the
in
most
sight.
amazing thing. Like, wow, this is like hands-on personalized service. There is nothing to scale in this particular place. This is like, when people say home cooking, this is essentially home cooking
Yeah.
and home squeezed lemons at the
I
on the
love
table.
about New Orleans, though, you know, just the food is, you can go to the, you know, Commander's Palace, or you can go to Willie Mae's, and it's hard to find a bad meal in New Orleans, right? I mean, you got to look for someplace that doesn't have good food, you know, and just on these little neighborhood restaurants tucked inside, like not on a major street, not on, like you said, you got to know where you're going. You got to know where it is. Somebody's got to tell you. I just do love that about it, because it's not just that it's good food, but it's all that comes along with that, with the community and camaraderie, you know,
Yeah.
of it. Little neighborhood bars that I've, you know, had the pleasure of visiting, you know, of patronizing many in my day, you know, just
How much pleasure,
little,
Miss Ellen, is what I was going to ask you.
you know, Paiutes and Jackie and George's on Claiborne, and, you know, just a number of others that are, you would have to just be driving around and, oh, look, a bar.
Yes.
And they're fabulous.
I remember there was I don't think it was one of yours, sir, but there was a column a bit of a ways back, not too long though, where they were talking about the disappearance of the setup in New Orleans bars. And like, that was one of those things where it's like, it doesn't seem like a food thing, right, per se, but there's something about the ability to order drinks this way,
Correct.
you know, that is particular and raced in many ways, where it's just like, you know, I never thought about a setup, you know, like I never put that much intense thinking into like, what is the setup? What is it? Because it's not like whether or not you include like okra in your gumbo. It's not things like people like hurt about, but
or fight about.
Right, exactly. It's like, that's not how my mama does it. And then suddenly things get ugly, you know, but it is something where it's like to be able to drop into a bar like that. And like I still occasionally go to Candlelight Lounge right next to Tuba Fat Square, you know, and they'll still do you a setup, you know, at the candlelight, but it feels like a dying breed.
Yeah.
You know, when you're there, it feels like, oh, this does seem like it's the only one of these in this area now.
And I think that's what so many New Orleanians feel about the city and the culture in general. This, you're feeling like you're seeing things die, you know, over and over again. That's why I think people are mourning the loss of neighborhoods the way that they are. Jerome Smith told me a few years ago when I was talking to him, he was talking about the incursion of Airbnbs into Treme. And he said, in this neighborhood, there won't be any more trombone shorties. And when you think about it in that way, like that the neighborhood itself shapes the people who came out of those neighborhoods, and that change in the neighborhood means that the people who've come out of those neighborhoods won't be coming out of those neighborhoods anymore. It changes it from a mere, you know, business or government regulation conversation into the very fabric of community. And is it at all possible to continue being a New Orleanian in this new commercialized environment? And I think the answer to that is sadly no. And people are still trying to figure out, okay, well, if we can't be Treme and Treme anymore, then where can we be Treme? You know, if we can't just look next door and get the tuba player, or look 2 doors down and get the drummer, if we got to have cars, if we have to, you know, do Calendly or something to bring people together, then, you know, that's something that's destroyed. And I don't know how we get that back. And I think people are still mourning those particular losses.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I will put the question back to everybody else, because I am not magic. How do we keep that? Like, how do we, even if what is lost cannot be recovered, right? Like, how do we keep what we have? And in the grand tradition of New Orleans, make something even better or more interesting or greater down the line if we can figure out a way to turn something bad into something good, you know? And so I think part of that goes to like how sort of one of the through lines that we've been talking about this whole time is like, how are neighborhoods valued? How is culture valued? What is considered worth preservation, right? Because if those neighborhoods mattered to how we conceptualize the city beyond print, you know, or advertising, or, you know, black and white photos of folks doing things or whatever, you know, like, how do we then, how would we be treating with that, right, in a different way? Ayana, I see a hand. Is it not letting you? Is it, I see your hand, but
You're on mute, Ayana.
I tried to click the
I'm
add.
sorry, everyone. I'm just enjoying the conversation. It was my daughter that raised her hand. I didn't even know she knew how to Zoom. But we're just listening. It's a lot going on.
From the hands of Babe.
Hey, Ayana, I hope you're doing well.
So,
Hey, Jarvis, how you doing?
I'm good.
See? That's why you can't say
It's
nothing
New
about
Orleans,
nobody.
yes.
You know, I find it, and I'm hope I'm not, you know, talking on every question, but I always, I'm a Libra, so I always try to find the balance, you know, because there's a balance in investment and preservation. You know, again, the neighborhood I grew up in, and now I'm like, what do they want for that house? There were years and years when like nobody was in the neighborhood, nobody. You know, just a few homeowners or long-time renters who were there, and a lot of blight and disinvestment. And so when markets are that, and people can get a house for a song and come in and fix it up, and that spurs some other investment, you know, there's a part of you that's like, okay, I can't be mad at people for investing in I mean, you can be mad, but you can't be mad, you know, at them for investing in the neighborhood. You know, there's some folks say, I want a little gentrification in my neighborhood because that's going to make my property values go up, right? So can we get a little bit of that in my neighborhood? So I struggle sometimes with, nobody wants displacement, and people who long-standing and are forced out, you know, for market reasons. But how do you balance? I think there's a question of how do you balance investment in neighborhoods, and maybe it's what kind of investment in neighborhoods, and whether that's public investment. A lot of it can be public investment that can spur or leverage private or philanthropic investment to create the kinds of neighborhoods that, you know, that we want to see. You know, I'll go to the City Hall example. I put my cards on the table as a former employee, you know, and there's somebody, you know, we had our high school graduation at the municipal auditorium. So here's a building that's been sitting there for what, 15 years now, and there was some money dedicated to it or not dedicated, you know, all of that. So maybe it's not City Hall. I get that, but then what? Because if we protest, and that's great, but what's our solution for what goes there? So where is the conversation about, and maybe I've missed it, and that very well may have. So it's not City Hall, because that's a bad idea for a number of reasons. But then what is our answer for what goes there to create some investment in the neighborhood? And where do we find the resources to make that happen? And, you know, again, to me, it's got to be some kind of public investment, which had been earmarked for a civil rights museum, for example, that then wasn't enough, or wasn't, you know, it was in the capital budget that was 5 years in tier 5 or whatever. So it's down the line. So to what end, are we're preserving, and people have a quality of life, but what is their quality of life when they can't afford housing and they can't afford to save for their children's education, or they can't afford, if they, God forbid, something happens and they can't, get out of town. So I just ask those questions of all of us to think about what is for me, I struggle with it, to think about what is what's the balance between the preservation and investment. There are a lot of people I know who were kind of, when the city made all of the Airbnb regulations that, you have to live in the house and you have to, you can't be a whole house rental. It's got to be a one room. I know a lot of folk who had bought some property who were going to make that investment property. It's like, so just when I buy property and try to make some money, now we put all the regulations in place, so you can't just, buy it for an investment property. So I'm asking the question because I don't know the answer. Where do we find the balance?
I have some thoughts, but I don't want to jump in if somebody else wants to. No, just because I think that's one of those situations where, right, we put in those rules and regulations, but we didn't put them in all neighborhoods, did we?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that becomes the situation where it's like, how is this investment working? Who is going to pay the benefit for other people reaping the rewards? And which neighborhoods does that happen in? And I mean, we don't really have to look further than the fact that there is an under Claiborne, right? As opposed to the fact that there used to be a thriving neighborhood community right there. And now they're trying to tell people that they can't be under Claiborne in the place that used to be the thriving community. Because I don't know, we're preserving our sacred highway space. Like, I don't know what the rationale there is. But to me, I think we have to look to equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to look to history, because if we're trying to preserve culture, we're not trying to preserve problems too, right? And I think a lot of people sort of think of that as the bath with the bathwater. Well, you can't change the neighborhood because you're preserving it. No, you could. The bywater doesn't need Airbnbs. It needs a grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, so there are ways to think about that. But again, I don't think that talking about the ways in which we are not unique, right, from the rest of the United States, I don't think that is a way that problems are often seen in cities in modern parlance. Like, if you go back to, Whole House and that kind of thing in like Chicago, where people are like, how can we reimagine the city? Like, that's a different conversation. But now it's sort of like, well, we need money to fix stuff. So how do we get money? As opposed to asking, what stuff do we need to fix and how do we fix that? And is money necessary? It seems like the jumping off point is we need money to fix problems. And it's not. In the case of a museum, you're going to need a building. So you need money to fix that problem. But, in the case of like neighborhood revitalization, that is a community thing. It can be gardens. It can be better schools, things that perhaps involve money, but don't need money, in the same way. But that's just my perspective, right? And I say that from the channel, which used to be 75% Black, I guess, and is now 75% white.
I think there's a parallel between, trying to save the Louisiana coast and trying to save New Orleans culture. You ask about restoration, but first you got to stop the loss itself before you can even think about restoring that which has been lost. And so I think the immediate fight is, how do we not lose more than we've already lost, after we've lost so much. And you can't knock the people for trying. I remember just a few years ago, the city of New Orleans had an ordinance where they wanted any large scale project that the city engaged in to employ people who are from New Orleans, right? To build up the people who live here. And, the conservative Louisiana legislature shot that down and said, we're not allowing that to go into any contract language. And so things like, innocuous, I would say they're innocuous, laws such as that get shot down. And it's not, you would think that if you truly cared about the city of New Orleans, that you would be really eager to support such thing. But the opposition came from people who don't love New Orleans. and so it failed. And so I think people are trying in so many different ways. I mean, you have Ashe Cultural Arts Center on Ashe, and you have, you know, what Miss Leona Tate is doing with the TEP Center, and you have people all over the city who are trying to preserve, you know, what's left without losing any more. I will hope that we can, again, stop the loss immediately and then kind of think about how we build it up. But stopping the loss means that people in New Orleans have to have jobs where they can afford to live in these neighborhoods and can afford to live and pay the taxes and pay the rent and pay the utilities, which doesn't really exist right now. So, but I think very fundamentally, how do we stop it? Like you mentioned equity. I think that's the start. People have to be able to afford to live here, because once they can't afford to live here, you know, when you say everything we love about New Orleans is because of Black people, most often it's because of poor Black people, you know, not just Black people writ large, but a very specific economic working class group. I mean, you didn't have rich Black people doing masking as Indians or in second line culture or starting Bounce or any of those things. You know, that's not where, that didn't come from some lofty perch, you know, atop the social heap. That came from the bottom. And once that bottom is gone, then so goes the culture.
I feel like I saw, there we go. Yeah, I knew I saw a hand a second ago. Go, Christian.
Just that sort of brings me back to two of the pieces that were in the email for the discussion, for Black Homeowners, Hollow Victory, and You Can't Go Home Again, where it's like a double whammy. It almost felt like to me, where you on the one hand, if things get destroyed, you don't get the help you need, and then after you can't afford to rebuild because other people will move in and take that space or take that place and edge you out. And I think that right now it's important to have these conversations, because in many ways it feels like the pandemic is this same pivotal moment where a lot of people, especially musicians and so on, that make this place so great, are out of a job or are having a hard time sort of getting by, and you have businesses closing, you have sort of institutions struggling, and it feels like this is the time where we would need to sort of find solutions to make sure that this doesn't erode in a way, as Jarvis said, linking it to the coast, because I don't know, in a lot of ways, I in the US, I often have the feeling that stuff doesn't get fixed until it's broken. Preventative medicine or preventative road work or anything isn't really a thing. It's more, we'll wait until it's really broken and then try to rebuild. But I think that it now is the time to conserve, because otherwise what will be rebuilt won't be the same thing that was lost.
Absolutely. Ounce of prevention's worth a pound of cure is what my grandmama always said. So that's real. Do other people have like sort of reactions? Or here's a different way. Was anybody else inspired by something in the book with some sort of action that seemed like something that was doable or interesting or whatnot? Like, obviously I was like, museum, what? Heard. And that was like, who needs me? What do you want? I do research. Like, you know what I mean? And that became the vibe. Like, it's like, I know people who write grants. What can we do? You know? And so I'm just wondering if folks either in those 6 columns or in other things saw moments or things where they're like, wait, maybe there is a solution to that, even if it's a little one, or maybe this is an idea that's fruitful that people would find interesting. Anything like that? I didn't mean to put everybody on the spot. Please come with a solution to all of your problems. That's your homework for tonight. You only have one page and it has to be double spaced. But, you know, I felt like other people might be having that kind of reaction too, where they were inspired by something in the book.
Yeah. On that note of preservation, Jarvis, I so appreciate you pointing out too, like, not just Black people, poor Black people. That's who makes this culture. So I'm a member of the crew of Red Beans, and, you know, we did Feed the Second Line, and it was illuminating to see that some of our most respected culture bearers were also living in, like, you know, unfortunate situations that were the direct result of systemic injustice. So building that system and safety net for the people who make New Orleans what it is, you know, so that they can continue to live and thrive. So when there is like systemic failure to do that, it does take the people. And in fact, that's where the whole idea of a social aid and pleasure club came from. You know, it's we've got to take care of us. And that's what it was until FDR's New Deal, where there actually started to be systemic supports. It was people engaged in mutual aid, taking care of one another. And I think some of what that can look like today is being conscious about the businesses that we're supporting, providing platforms for artists, listening to someone's story, amplifying their voices. My partner and I co-host Friday Night Funk on 102.3 WHIV FM New Orleans. And this month, in celebration of Black History Month, we've been reading actually from Jarvis's book, and like the really juicy piece that people were really into was, why doesn't Louisiana have a civil rights museum? And so like that felt really powerful to be like, wait, I have this platform that reaches untold numbers of people, and to say like, yeah, does this seem like a glaring omission to anybody else? Does anyone out there who's listening want to change that? So just kind of using whatever platforms we have available to ourselves, and all of us here do in one way or another, to amplify that message and that rallying cry to get other people activated and on board, because so many people have a deep love and appreciation for the city and don't know actions to take to support it. So sometimes it is as simple as saying like, here's a problem, here's one way you can get involved in creating a solution.
Absolutely. I recently found out from a friend of mine who does horse race handicapping, of all things. And they were talking about how one of the like major stakes races, I guess, for like the Louisiana Derby is named after a guy who either owned enslaved jockeys or something along those lines, but it could be named after the jockey who won about 1 million races, right? And was like the most successful jockey in the United States at the time, famous throughout and you know, it's like, so it's so simple. It's like, okay, we have a race named after somebody who was not great. And then we could name it after somebody who was literally great, like has a demonstrable record of greatness, like as measured by a stopwatch or, you know, pocket watch or whatever. But until I didn't know that was a thing, you know, that we had as a potential. It's not a huge problem compared to the problems that folks have, but I do think it's emblematic of the fact that there are all these little things that people can sort of get at, you know, in a variety of ways still. And also it makes me wonder, right? Because they might kick me out of like library circles for saying this, right? But the question becomes, yes, it would be amazing to have a museum. Until we have a museum, how do we think about New Orleans as like the museum? in and of itself, right? Like, what if you had to go to all of these different places? And it's like, enjoy your exhibit walking tour, because the city is the museum until we get one. You know what I mean? And so even thinking about if there are institutions that will not recognize or will not support or will not undergird the efforts to do a lot of this work that we've been discussing over the course of the evening, how do we circumvent those institutions? Because New Orleans is really good at that too. You know,
There's a
and
little bit of
so-
that. I think Rooks, I know there's a marker at Dookie Chase. And I know there are a few others. I know that's not the only one. I don't know where the other ones, I believe that's not the only one.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm loving your idea about that. And I guess my question is, where are those and how can more of those spots be supported? And how do we get involved if you want to do it? Or how can, I mean, I went to the Black Philanthropy celebration of the Greater New Orleans Foundation a couple of week or so ago. And I've always had this notion of, you too can be a philanthropist, right? You don't have to be Bill Gates. You don't have to be, Bezos or the ex, to be considered a philanthropist, that every act of kindness and donation, no matter how small, can make something happen. And I think if there are enough people, we've got all those, not the best analogy, all those little mini libraries. What do people put a little box in their neighborhood? Pick up enough people to put a marker somewhere at a historic spot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have Paper Monuments was doing that with their project. I will say that I think that there are so many examples already of people doing that. I mean, the Backstreet Cultural Museum, for example, is an example of, okay, we'll just do our own museum. We don't have to wait for anybody else. Jerome Smith, starting Tambourine and Band, is essentially, teaching the children about the civil rights movement and the people who came before them. Even, board member Malik Bartholomew does his No NOLA tours, treats the city as this kind of own museum. And one of the things that I think is great about living in a city where there have been so many preservationists is that you really can treat the city like a museum, because it's probably the original building, or often it's the original building that you can point out. Obviously, Woolworths isn't there anymore with the monstrosity that was the Hard Rock was being built on top of that. So there are obviously a whole lot of ain't there no more stories, but there still are some, well, it's still there story. And I think that, it is possible even now to walk through this city and say, this is our history. This is our, this is the history of civil rights right here at this exact spot. And but at the same time, I think there needs to be some kind of organizing principle behind it, so people know that and know to do it and know how to do it. And but yeah, I agree with you that the goal needs to be the museum, yes, but in the meantime, what do we do to get there?
Yeah. I mean, if only they had just fully legalized the sticky icky, then perhaps we would be rolling in tax dollars like it were Colorado, right? Because I mean, heck, if you want an example, it's like a license to print money out there. And just filled with revenue, coffers are full, doing what they want, living life. And obviously that's not going to happen here because there's other sort of circumstances, but New Orleans has always had to deal with those circumstances, right? Of the sort of the surrounding haters, if one will.
Haters being the most appropriate word.
Absolutely. Somebody mentioned a virtual museum, which, by the way, yes, please, digital humanities. I think that's a great idea and a way to like bring this information together. Or, you could have walking tours or podcasts or all kinds of things. One of the interesting things about the virtual museum, I think that comes up when people talk about doing that here, is that New Orleans is, I believe, still one of the least internet connected cities in the country. And that is different when everybody's got, a little computer in their hand, but then you have to think about like optimizing it for a screen like this, right? And like, what does that mean? And how do you get people to still engage that when it's not a place that you can walk into, where you can't see the giant photo or see the literal, seat or whatever. And I think that there's value to both of those experiences, going all the way back to the beginning to what Megan was saying, with like accessibility is the goal. And there should be a digital museum, right? There should also be a physical one. And then
Yes.
everybody can go,
Agreed, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think so. But all right, let's see. What else did I miss? Oh yeah, with the putting up the new markers with the Plessy and Ferguson Foundation. Yeah, I think and so I did not want to imply by any stretch of the imagination that work was not an ongoing project for many, many amazing people in this city, just that it is. And also we know that when folks come here, unless they have a place to literally sort of walk right into, you know what I mean? It becomes, once it's too much work to leave or get around or explore, then suddenly folks don't do it, right? And that's how that money doesn't make it out to those businesses.
Or if it's August and
or if it's August.
and it's 500 degrees outside, but
I mean, I almost like August in that weird way because
I actually do. I don't do cold. So the people who live wherever, Chicago, north of the Mason-Dixon, I can't, it's too cold. But also I think to that, even with a walking tour and those, I don't know how well publicized those are. Like, is there a little brochure at, what's the welcome station on Basin Street, the Basin Street station that has all of those markers? Where do people, right? So it's one thing to have them. And then it's another thing if generally they're not, aware of where they are, even if you even wanted to do a little, a walking tour. So it's also getting some of that, making it part of the tourism industry. So, breaking into that with equity, right? To even bring awareness about other places to visit other than that neighborhood, that well-known neighborhood, that shall not be named, that everyone, just automatically thinks of when they think about New Orleans.
Yeah, well, the Civil Rights Trail itself is a program of the Lieutenant Governor's office, the Office of Cultural Tourism. And so I think the one outside Dookie Chase that you mentioned was the first in the city. And what's the church? I can never remember, in Central
Zion?
City where SCLC
New Zion?
started.
Is that right?
I think you're right. I think it's New Zion. I think there's one there too. I
I
think there's one there too.
Yeah, I mean, and there are places, like if it's a National Historic Marker, there is actually a place. But if it's not, right? And then it becomes a situation where somebody's like, well, I want to learn about the history of in the past in New Orleans, like fraught history. And the answer is, well, you can go to the Whitney, which is like across the way, and also a very particular slice of life, right?
Yeah.
Because that's not the same thing that folks are necessarily talking about. And it makes it seem like there was slavery and it was bad. And then, some stuff happened and then everything is like better now.
Yeah. Have a hand grenade.
On this, don't think about anything. Don't let any intrusive thoughts get at you about like looking around and being like, but wait, nope, don't worry about that.
Exactly.
Have another hand grenade.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is a way, and I think like people, and it goes to something that Jarvis said earlier about sort of this area of history getting treated with a particular amount of like shame heaped on it. in certain public environments, right? When it comes to how we talk about history and what kind of history is valued and learned and appreciated, and whether or not certain advanced legal theories are being taught to kindergartners. But like, sorry, it drives me crazy every single time. It's just not happening. But regardless if that is a narrative that is occurring, right? Like, we know that factually those things aren't the same. We know that this history matters. We know that it needs to be preserved, and we know that there are people trying to do it. And I think the question is just mobilizing people, as has been said a couple of times, right? To unify those efforts, to organize those efforts, to make that sort of more cohesive in some ways, while still preserving that individuality that I think really echoes throughout the book, where it's like people come together as individuals to accomplish things. And it doesn't mean that they're sacrificing individuality to come together. It doesn't mean they're sacrificing community to be individuals. They can do both.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. I didn't think it, I've loved this conversation because, yeah, I wrote these columns, but to hear all of you all discussing them this way, it's been really magical for me. But yeah, putting those two things together, both the sense of community and the sense of the individual, you know, which so many jazz musicians will tell you is like the core essence of that music. Like, how do you play by yourself but play with other people at the same time? How do you find yourself to be part of this cohesive whole but still distinctive enough to stand out? Yeah, I mean, it really defines the city and the people here and the neighborhoods here. And yeah, thank you all for this conversation. It's just been great in every way for me. So I'm thankful for that.
Thank you for all of these. What are you talking about? It's like, no, you're welcome for us reading all of your amazing columns for the last like 20 years. No problem. We're givers. What can we say? But no, I think there's so many amazing, like, I don't want to say juicy because that always implies like goodness, because it's not always like a positive juice, right? But there are so many sort of juicy and interesting morsels and tidbits and whatnot throughout that I feel like this conversation honestly could have gone a million different ways, talking about different aspects of the city, and it would have been just as relevant and just as fabulous. So thank you is the real answer for being a sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Not griot, like, yeah, almost an archivist, right? An archivist of experience.
I like that. I like that description. And that's kind of what I was going for when curating this, was to, as you put it, a snapshot over 20 years, if there is such a thing. I know that's an oxymoron of a sort.
A time lapse. It's a time lapse.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. Of that, this is New Orleans. This is New Orleans, and my perspective of New Orleans, which is not necessarily going to be yours, but one that I think is worth discussion and wrestling with, and us trying to figure out what it means about where we are right now, which is really all I really want us to do, is to really think about how to make this city better. If you love it, you want her to be better. And if you love it, then you have to love the people who are here. Mm-hmm. There's no loving New Orleans without loving the people of New Orleans. And we just have to work on making the city better and making the people better. That's what I am hoping this book leads to in some kind of small way.
Well, I know that it's going to lead to that and another awesome discussion probably next month. So I'm going to let Megan close us out, because I'm sure there's more information that needs to be given.
Thank you, Rooks.
Thank you still. And thanks to everyone.
I'm reading your book right now, and I'm just blown away at the whole concept of a ship named the Black Joke chasing down slavers. It's really, really like mind stretching for me.
It's a gift from the history gods and also a curse. Like, who named the ship this? Yeah. like it's gonna be the title, but it was an issue. They were like, we can't make this the title. I was like, I'm Black. We can make this the title. It's gonna be okay. But so
Well, thank
yes,
you
but
for
enough
it.
about me. All about Jarvis. So let's
Thank
go
you
to.
for it.
Okay, thank you guys so much. Rooks, Jarvis, thank you so much for facilitating this amazing conversation. Thank you everyone who joined in and chimed in and shared your perspective. I really love the fact that even folks who at the beginning were like, oh, I didn't read the columns, or oh, am I supposed to talk, ended up feeling welcome to participate, because that's really the kind of community we want to create here. As Rooks said, we'll be back after the carnival holidays with more discussions and more community events. So stay tuned to our newsletter, our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter. You can find us all sorts of ways. If you need to contact us directly, go to onebookonenola.org and just click the contact us button, and you can find us. We'll respond usually within a day. And thank you again. Also, we will be, after Carnival, going full swing on our community book distribution. So if you're in a community organization and you need free books, contact us. We can get those to you. Free copies of Jarvis's I Feel to Believe, so everyone can participate in reading. Stay safe out there. It's the first Carnival in a minute. Stay safe. I hope you all have a wonderful, uplifting, beautiful time. We need it, don't we? I'll see you soon.
Cheers, happy Mardi Gras, everybody.
Same to you. Good
Happy
night,
Mardi Gras.
everybody.
Yes, happy Mardi
It's a
Gras.
marathon, not a sprint.
Take care.